With recent flops such as The Flash and Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, it's easy to think that this is the year of overinflated movie budgets. But over the last 20 years, there have been some incredibly exorbitant production budgets, some of which make sense because of the massive ensemble cast and incredible visuals, and some are purely on the list because of constant reshoots and complete studio mismanagement. So let's take a look at the top 10 most expensive films of all time. Number 10. Spectre.
So what's going on, James? They say you're finished.
What do you think?
I think you're just getting started.
Why is the 24th James Bond film so expensive? Well, take the use of practical effects, the fact that Spectre was largely filmed in populated locations, and the salary of Daniel Craig on his 4th Bond film, and you have your answer. Spectre was filmed in Mexico, Austria, England, and Italy, and this globe-trotting approach also added to the rather large budget. Spectre's budget was $300 million in 2015. We will give the inflation-adjusted top 10 at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. And the rule of thumb is to double the production budget to account for the cut of the ticket the cinema gets. So with marketing and distribution included, Spectre had a total budget of $600 million. It made $879 million at the box office, so despite an out-of-control budget, it made a profit of $279 million. Number 9. Justice League.
They said the age of heroes would never come again.
It has to.
We all knew that Justice League had a messy production cycle, no more exemplified than by Henry Cavill's Mustache Gate. And the result of this shambolic production was an out-of-control budget. The Justice League consisted of a large cast of A-listers, with Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, Jeremy Irons, Jason Momoa, and Amy Adams to name a few. And most of these expensive actors were required to do extensive reshoots. Zack Snyder had pretty much finished production for Justice League when he was replaced by Joss Whedon, and Whedon rewrote and reshot large amounts of the film. The reshots were so extensive that "Release the Snyder Cut" became a Twitter mantra for many years, and Snyder fans were eventually rewarded for their efforts when the Snyder Cut of Justice League was released on HBO Max. But as for the theatrical release of Justice League, the Whedon reshoots, on top of what was already an expensive film, led to a $300 million budget. Double for marketing, and again we have a break-even point of $600 million. Justice League received $655 million at the box office, so it just about made a profit. But considering that 2012's The Avengers brought in $1.5 billion on a $225 million production budget, Justice League was most certainly a failure for Warner Brothers. Number 8. Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End.
There's not been a gathering like this in our lifetime.
And I owe them all money.
The first of the 2 Pirates of the Caribbean movies to make it onto the top 10 most expensive movies of all time. At World's End was the 3rd film in a Pirates franchise. The second Pirates of the Caribbean film cost $225 million, and the original Pirates cost $140 million. Now it's normal for sequels to cost more money than their predecessors, but even so, the budget for At World's End was very big. Johnny Depp's salary was reportedly around $50 million on top of the CGI costs, which to this day are still pretty impressive. Davy Jones' tentacle beard alone must have cost millions. Pirates of the Caribbean At World's End had a budget of $300 million, double for marketing and distribution, and we have a total budget of $600 million. The film made $960 million. Despite a hefty budget, At World's End made a very tidy profit for Disney. Number 7. Avengers Infinity War.
Engage all defenses and get this man a shield.
Infinity War juggled more characters than perhaps any movie before it, with Robert Downey Jr., Chris Hemsworth, Scarlett Johansson, Chris Pratt, and Zoe Saldana, to name just half of the star-studded cast. So with a large cast, it makes sense that Infinity War had a large budget. As well as a big cast, the motion capture for Thanos was rather impressive and cost a lot of money, with multiple extended sequences of the Mad Titan throughout the film. Infinity War spanned the entire Marvel universe, requiring a lot of different sets and CGI. The budget for Infinity War is the last one on the list to cost $300 million. Double for marketing and distribution gives Infinity War a budget of $600 million. Infinity War made over $2 billion at the box office, so it made a nice little profit of $1.4 billion. Number 6. Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
I will finish what you started.
After 10 years without a Star Wars film, the build-up to The Force Awakens was filled with enthusiasm and excitement, and director J.J. Abrams added to this excitement by saying all the right things in the lead-up to the film. One of which was that The Force Awakens would be using more practical effects than the Star Wars prequels did. He conveniently didn't mention that The Force Awakens, in fact, had more CGI than any of the prequel films too. So that explains in part why The Force Awakens' budget was so big. On top of the practical and visual effects, the costumes were incredibly detailed, which means expensive, and the sets were huge, with X-Wings, the Millennium Falcon, and other ships and bases being constructed for the film. The Force Awakens had a budget of $306 million, double for marketing and distribution, and Episode 7 had a total budget of $612 million. Making $2.06 billion at the box office, it's fair to say that the box office result more than justified the budget for the film. Number 5. Fast X.
Today, I raced to stop a bloodbath.
As we know, Fast and Furious is all about family, and by the 11th film in a franchise, this family was enormous. Along with all the regulars, Fast X brought in Jason Momoa, Brie Larson, and Alan Ritchson. Fast X was filmed during the COVID-19 pandemic, so there was a sustained period where filming was shut down. And once eventually reopened, the new safety procedures slowed production once again. Each day of filming cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for the cast and crew, so these delays, which were completely unavoidable, ballooned the budget for Fast X. The movie had a production cost of $340 million, double for marketing and distribution, and we have a budget of $680 million. Fast X made a total of $725 million, so making a profit of just $45 million, which is lower than the profit of Justice League. Number 4. Avengers: Age of Ultron.
There are no strings on me.
Perhaps surprising to many, Age of Ultron cost more than Avengers: Infinity War, and almost 65% more than the original Avengers film. There are a few key reasons why Age of Ultron cost so much. Yes, there's a large ensemble cast, like every Avengers movie, but for Age of Ultron, Robert Downey Jr. just signed a new lucrative contract that took a sizable proportion of the budget. But the on-location shooting had more of a part to play in explaining Ultron's budget. Many, myself included, dislike the overuse of green screens in the last few MCU films, and would prefer them to go back to the Age of Ultron days, where the movie is clearly taking place in the real world, and not in some lifeless brown and grey CGI background. But with real-world location shooting, you've got to transport the whole cast and crew to a new country, pay for hotels, deal with difficult weather conditions, shut off roads, and much more. And it's not like Age of Ultron skimped on the CGI either. The ending sequence, where the country Sokovia was lifted into the atmosphere while Ultron robots swirled around it in their hundreds, was one of the most CGI-reliant sequences Marvel have ever done. So simply put, Age of Ultron had a lot of location shooting and a lot of CGI. The budget for the film was $365 million, double for marketing and distribution, and Age of Ultron has a total budget of $730 million. Making just under $1.4 billion at the box office, Age of Ultron ended up not doing too bad financially. Number 3. Pirates of the Caribbean: On Stranger Tides.
Is that it? I think so.
You would imagine that the top 3 consists of Avatar and Marvel films, but the 4th movie in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise breaks into the top 3, boasting a staggering budget that was 2.5 times higher than the original Pirates of the Caribbean. Stranger Tides was released in 2011, which is around the time when 3D was considered to be the future of cinema. The movie was shot using 3D cameras rather than the normal way of filming, which was to film in 2D and then convert it to 3D in post-production. This meant that there were longer and more expensive shoots, and you can imagine overtime pay and the cost of this new cutting-edge technology made up a substantial proportion of the production budget. On Stranger Tides used real, replica warships for a lot of their ship scenes, which is very expensive to do, on top of the weather conditions of filming at sea and in numerous locations, including Hawaii, Puerto Rico and Cornwall in the UK. On Stranger Tides had a budget of $379 million, doubled for marketing and distribution, and it has a total budget of $758 million. The film made just over $1 billion at the box office, so it made a lot of money, despite a colossal budget. Number 2. Avengers Endgame.
We owe this to everyone who's not in this room to try.
With the same massive ensemble cast that Infinity War had, Endgame was the last MCU film for Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans, so you can only imagine what their salaries were for the film. Infinity War and Endgame were filmed back to back, saving a lot of money in the process. So if Endgame was filmed separately, you can only imagine how much it would have cost. Endgame's climatic final battle between Thanos' army and the Avengers, Wakandans, Asgardians, and pretty much anyone who was in the previous MCU films. The action shots for this battle required an extensive amount of visual effects work, and Marvel used George Lucas's old company, Industrial Light and Magic, for these effects, as well as almost every other visual effects company in existence. Endgame had a budget of $400 million, double for marketing and distribution, and we get a budget of $800 million. It made almost $2.8 billion at the box office, so money very well spent it seems. And finally, onto our number 1. The most expensive movie of all time is The Flash. Only joking. The most expensive film of all time is of course Avatar: The Way of Water.
Outcast. That's all they see.
I see.
The second film in James Cameron's Avatar franchise, Way of Water was released 13 years after the original Avatar, and for most of those 13 years, it seems that James Cameron was working on Way of Water, with the majority of the movie being filmed underwater, new filming technology, underwater cameras, and special effects techniques needed to be created. And this took a lot of money and time, which is also money, as the crew working on this equipment wouldn't have come cheap. James Cameron said that a lot of Avatar 3 and 4 had also been shot, and the underwater equipment for these films has now been created, meaning that the production budget should be less for those future Avatar films. That is, unless Cameron decides to film in lava for Avatar 4, which I wouldn't totally put past him. The Way of Water had a budget of $416 million, double for marketing and distribution, and the total budget is $920 million. James Cameron said that The Way of Water needed to make $2 billion to break even, which to me sounds like a very creative way of marketing the film and building anticipation. But from my calculation, Avatar grossed $2,320 million at the box office, leaving a profit of $1.4 billion. So from the lowest to highest, the top 10 most expensive films of all time are Spectre, Justice League, Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, Infinity War, Star Wars Episode 7 The Force Awakens, Fast X, Avengers Age of Ultron, Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, Avengers Endgame, and The Flash. Avatar: The Way of Water. The inflation-adjusted top 10 is very interesting. The top 3 stay the same, but they change in order, with Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides the most expensive, at $512 million. Avatar: The Way of Water in second, and Avengers Endgame in third. Spider-Man 3 comes in at 8th place, costing $258 million in 2007, which comes to $378 million when adjusted for inflation. Fast and Furious falls off the top 10 and fits in at 13th place, below Tangled and John Carter. For more videos on movie finances, as well as reviews of all the biggest films, please consider subscribing to Film Club. It's early days for the channel, so your likes, comments, and subscriptions really help the channel to grow. Thank you, and see you again.